Russia is the largest country on the planet. It straddles 9 time zones, possesses half of the world's nuclear warheads, and it's the largest energy producer. But Russia is not the former Soviet Union. As third-term president, Vladimir Putin flexes his muscles at home and abroad. Can Russia be a superpower once again? This is him. Hello and welcome to Empire. I am Marwan Bishara. Since the Cold War ended 2 decades ago, the new emerging Russia has been largely defined by 2 men, Boris Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin. Yeltsin presided over the dismemberment of the old Soviet Union and the reckless privatization of the state's assets. Complicit in this decade-long Russian underhaul stood Western powers, eager to transform their old nemesis into a new ally. Washington saw this chaotic free-for-all as a new Wild West and assisted the plunder. Deepening inequality, mounting insecurity and disorder put a damper on the economic liberalization and increased the popular demand for security, stability, and the rule of the law. To regulate the heist and limit the damage, a new brand of centralization through authoritarianism and populist nationalism was introduced to Russia by the Yeltsin clique in 1999. Some call it Putinism.
Vladimir Putin is not a man you'd describe as subtle. The once and future Russian president wants to convey one message and one message only. Vladimir Putin equals power.
He's an athlete, master of martial arts. He rides a bike, he's multi-skilled, like our country. So he is as well, multi-skilled, positive, very handsome, and we simply love him.
But lest you think these carefully orchestrated photo ops are merely a vanity project, they're not entirely lost at sea. Putin sees the Russian presidency as a metonym for the entire country. In other words, when you think of Russia, he wants you to think of this. Not this. The Yeltsin days may be long gone, but Putin knows the same problems still exist. While Russia does boast massive reserves of natural gas, coal, and oil, that's only good news when energy prices soar, because the economy is dangerously unbalanced. A massive 70% of all exports come from energy sources or minerals, meaning the country is at the mercy of global commodities markets. Just as alarming, the Russian people are dying off at a staggering rate. Male life expectancy is a mere 59, and at this rate, Russia is set to lose 50 million people in the next 40 years. So it's no wonder Putin does everything he can to eliminate the impression of weakness. It also explains why he has never had any apparent qualms in crushing internal rebellion, which tries to challenge the power of the Kremlin. Hopes rose late last year of a newfound momentum for democratic reform.
The campaign is only starting. We, Yabloko, are announcing a campaign for the constitutional and lawful dismissal of the Putin group from power.
Critics of the Kremlin now openly describe political life in Russia as sovereign democracy, a curious state of affairs in which all the trappings of a democratic nation are readily apparent, but they exist purely to mask a fully functioning autocracy.
I come out onto the street and see totally different things from what I'm told on TV, and that's it.
For one thing, they've never believed Dmitry Medvedev to be the true leader of the nation. Critics look at the job swap with Vladimir Putin and see a puppet pretending to be president, looked on with boredom by his master. But for the time being, Vladimir Putin doesn't give the impression he particularly cares. He's happy to continue this political marriage of convenience. He does what he wants, Medvedev does what he's told. One of the most vexing questions is how Putin has managed to weld together popular support with the institutions of state to create this domination of power. The single most effective way has been the threat of terrorist attack, whether it be real, fabricated, convenient, or a combination of the three. Major incidents like the Moscow theater siege in 2002 and the Beslan school siege in 2004 have left a powerful impression on the Russian people. These extremist attacks, among others, are what Putin and his supporters cite in order to justify his uncompromising approach to power. They believe it's not democracy that's under threat, it's Russia itself.
I'm supporting Putin because he's the only one I can trust with my fatherland for my grandchildren and their children.
We came here to congratulate him. We came to remind people that the Russian state has to be defended for it not to collapse, for it not to fall to pieces.
If there's any doubt about Putin's commitment to this belief, just ask the Chechens. Putin's approach toward this breakaway republic has been entirely straightforward. He simply smashed it. Since 2007, Chechnya has been ruled by a former warlord hand-picked by the Kremlin, despite having fought against the Russians in the First Chechen War. And if anything, this partnership works a bit too well. During the election, one Chechen district awarded Putin a curious 107% of the vote, a fact no one in the Kremlin seems to mind. What's more important is spectacle, consistency, and the projection of power. The rest has to
familiar battlegrounds. The Kremlin has warned against what it terms Washington's destabilizing foreign policy, and Putin has publicly accused the West of interfering in Russian internal affairs and claims his re-election by almost a two-thirds majority as a victory against Russian foreign and domestic enemies alike. As he prepares to take over the Kremlin for the third time, there is no telling what Putin is thinking. Will he raise the anti-American rhetoric or pursue a more pragmatic course with Washington? Either way, the post-Cold War honeymoon has given way to a new geopolitical clash of interests reminiscent of past rivalries.
A day of high drama and momentous events in the current historic session of the United Nations.
Moscow's dealings with the United Nations have always been a little bit prickly.
The drastic reorganization of the World Body Secretariat.
Whether it be Soviet leaders banging their shoes in 1960 or Russian leaders blocking resolutions today, the reason for the intransigence is the same. Because of a deep-seated belief that Western powers were manipulating the United Nations to promote their own agenda. Last year, Russian diplomats made it abundantly clear that Western countries far exceeded a UN mandate to protect the Libyan people, and used the justification of a resolution to topple Muammar Gaddafi, far beyond the original remit. When a similar measure regarding Syria came up for a vote earlier this year, Moscow refused to let it happen again.
Russia will do all it can in order to prevent the situation in Syria descending into a similar scenario to Libya.
Since then, Russia has signaled a willingness to help resolve the Syrian crisis, but on its terms. Damascus and Moscow have long shared strategic interests and a sympathetic worldview, and so, while Russia's tone has softened, its opposition to Western interference has not. At its essence, Vladimir Putin's position mirrors most of his Soviet predecessors. He believes that someone must stand up to the perpetual interference by the United States in the sovereign affairs of other nations, and like those before him, he's happy to be the man to do it. Noted for their absence are the perestroika days of overly optimistic statesmanship.
Some believe that the weight of history condemned our two great countries, our two great peoples, to permanent confrontation. Well, you and I must challenge history, make new strides, build a relationship of enduring cooperation.
Once Vladimir Putin took office, the mood was certainly polite, but clearly more than a little awkward.
We spent a lot of time in our relationship trying to get rid of the Cold War.
Elsewhere, Putin will not back down on issues like NATO expansion that Moscow feels are designed to provoke. And he doesn't much care for Washington starting turf battles by blatantly trying to poach former Soviet satellite states. A brief war with Georgia in 2008 was orchestrated to remind the West, not just Tbilisi, that Putin was in no mood to be pushed around. But he's also well aware how this plays at home. When he takes on a defiant neighbor or slaps down Washington, it only adds to the nationalist zeal that's backed him for 13 years now and counting. Like those who went before him, Putin seems happy to forge relations which irritate and sometimes anger the West. Today, Russia's status as one of the BRIC countries gives it the opportunity to build new diplomatic and economic ties with the emerging world. Early last year, China quietly overtook Germany to become Russia's largest trading partner.
Welcome the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation.
With the economic balance shifting, Putin feels confident to do a little lecturing.
Today, the pride of Wall Street's investment banks have virtually ceased to exist. They have suffered losses surpassing their total revenues of the last 25 years cumulative. This example, better than any criticism, describes the real situation.
All of which demonstrates that, as far as Moscow is concerned, when it comes to dealing with the West, whether it be diplomatically, militarily, or economically,